Thank you for being here for this capstone webinar for the Pritzker Fellowship. I think, as most of you know, my name is Anissa, and I have been the Pritzker Fellow for Kent County for the past 2 years, since August of 2018. And at this time, I just like to have people introduce themselves. There's a lot of people on the webinar today, so we're gonna just go ahead and use the chat function. You wanna just put your name and organization if that's applicable, maybe where you're joining in from. I know we have a lot of Kent County folks, but some folks from outside the county as well. And we can just get a sense of who's on the call today. That would be great. And then I also want to encourage everyone to use the reaction buttons throughout today's presentation. I imagine that we're all pretty familiar with the Zoom platform right now, but these are in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So if you hear something that you like or you agree with in our meetings in person, a lot of times we'll do affirmation snaps. You can feel free to do those, but otherwise you can use the clapping reaction button. And another thing that would be awesome is if you hear work or projects that you've been directly involved in, go ahead and give a thumbs up. Just show, I'd love to just be able to see this collaboration because there's so many partners that have been a part of this work that I've been leading for the last 2 years. This is being recorded, so just want to make sure that everybody's aware of that. And my colleague, Katie Hopp, will be monitoring the chat box so that if you have trouble or any questions, you can reach out to Katie and she will help you out. So the purpose of the webinar today is really 5 parts. I want to go over some of the fellowship accomplishments from the past 2 years. I also want to offer some recommendations specifically for maintaining the momentum in Kent County when we think about this early childhood systems work. And I'd also want to discuss this concept of systemsness and how we can leverage that not only as part of our local work, but in connection with the national movement for early childhood. We'll have some time for some interactive discussion because I don't want this to just be something that you hear and walk away from well-informed. That's part of it, but I also would love for this webinar today to spark action with all of us. And then lastly, expressing my gratitude because I am very, very grateful to so many and this has been a wonderful experience. So that's what we're gonna talk about today on the webinar. But before we get started, we are going to do a quick poll. So if you can go to this website, you see it there on the screen, pollev.com/kconnect. And you could do this on your phone if you have your phone near you. You could also open another screen to do this on your computer. But if you go ahead and go to pollev.com/kconnect, then you're going to see a polling question that I would like everybody to respond to. And I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen right now so that my colleague Mark can share his. And we'll see the poll on the screen. The question is thinking about the Pritzker Fellowship. Oh, this is the wrong question, Mark. We need the other one up. Thinking about the Pritzker Fellowship, I want you to just take a minute to describe the impact in 1 or 2 words. And I know many of you have intersected with the work of the Pritzker Fellowship in some way over the past 2 years. And so you have some experience, whether it's been working directly with me, working with the national movement, or just connected in any way. So just give 1 or 2 words about what the impact has been of the Pritzker Fellowship. Again, it's pollev.com/kconnect. Seeing a lot of different things here. Community is I think that when there's words that are said more than once, it gets bigger. Oh, I see just my name on there. That's fun. Systems change. I love that. That's really at the bottom line what so much of this is about. And I wanted just to put up this question and have you all participate because it is a time of reflection to think about the last 2 years and to think about what has been accomplished and what has been started. It is important to also consider that impact. And when you look at these words on the screen, yes, they do reflect some of my direct work and my leadership, but they are also a testament to the power of collaborative partnerships and what can be accomplished when so many people are connected to a common goal. So thanks for participating in that. We'll save this word cloud and just have that to be an inspiration. Thanks, Mark. I'll go ahead and share again now. Okay, so then moving forward, I want to, before we get into all the accomplishments and the different pieces that have been connected to the fellowship, I want to start with story, just to really ground us in what this work is about. So these are my good friends. Their names are Margarita and Jeff. And this is a picture of them in August 2018, which is the exact time that I started the Pritzker Fellowship. And they didn't have any children at the time, but they were our go-to friends when we needed help with our children. So this is a picture of Margarita and Jeff with my 3 boys. They were always so helpful in providing childcare, even overnight care, and actually with much of the travel that I did with the fellowship, they were very involved in helping my husband and I to make that possible when it came with things that were needed for the kids. So really appreciated them. Didn't have kids of their own, as I said, but lots of nieces and nephews, and they were just that go-to kind of aunt and uncle figure for so many kids in their community. Then when Margarita turned 30, they decided that they were ready to start having a family of their own. And in December of 2019, they found out they were expecting twins. So this was a really exciting time, and it was really interesting because I was in the midst of this fellowship at a time when I had very close friends expecting their first, not just 1 baby, but 2 babies. So we're going to pick up on this story a little bit later, but I just want you to have them in your mind as we go through today's presentation. So just a little background on the Pritzker Fellowship. This program is part of the National Collaborative for Infants and Toddlers, which is powered by the Pritzker Children's Initiative. And it's a special initiative that's aiming to start families strong with healthy births, stronger support for families, and expanded access to early care and learning that's high quality. And this is a national movement. So as you can see, there's 29 communities all across the state, and there were 14 fellows that were placed in this role 2 years ago across the country. And Michigan's not highlighted on this map, but Michigan has very recently become an official part of the NCIT community because we have a state level grant working on an early childhood policy agenda, and I know many of you are familiar with that work. So Michigan and Kent County are absolutely on board with this initiative and very excited to be involved. And with the Pritzker Fellows, the role was really to give communities very strategic staff support to help catalyze this movement and connect what was happening across the national landscape to the local community, giving more staff capacity. They were asking communities to look for people who had leadership experience, familiarity with early childhood, and a commitment to equitable outcomes and really working on a systems level. So obviously I was very honored to be selected to be the Pritzker Fellow for Kent County and serve in this role for the last 2 years. Our goal was to focus on infants and toddlers and give that leadership to move forward an ambitious agenda that could increase access, especially for our most vulnerable families and children. This is just a really fun picture from one of the convenings with the fellows. We were able to get together all of the fellows from across the country periodically. And if there's fellows on this call, if you can just do a thumbs up to just kind of show on the screen where you are, if people are seeing it on the side. These women are so awesome. And so much of what I was able to accomplish and do was because of this amazing cohort. And there will be another cohort of fellows starting later this year. But I can't even tell you how incredible they are and how much I learned from them. So is our hashtag, babies are our bosses. So that's who we were working for, and we were working together. And I have really, really been blessed to be part of this group. So in terms of the actual work, what each fellow was asked to do was identify goal areas with their community that they would focus on for the length of the fellowship. And for Kent County, we ended up selecting 4 goal areas. The first one was in this data systems area, and we were wanting to create more shared and integrated data capacity across early childhood system partners. We hear that all the time, that can be quite a barrier when you're trying to do systems work. So that was one area of focus. Secondly, another goal area was healthy births. And in this goal area, we were looking at the disparities with birth outcomes in our community and working to develop and launch a community-based doula program that would focus on training women of color to be doulas and then providing greater access to women of color to have doula services. Affordable, high-quality childcare was a third goal area for Kent County. When I first started, we were focused a lot on increasing participation in our state's quality rating system and really helping both the childcare provider community and families understand what that meant and why it was important. And then obviously, more recently, with the COVID-19 pandemic, much of the childcare work has turned to be response and recovery and working to support the industry in this very difficult time. And then the fourth goal area, political will and engagement. And this was a place where we just started to leverage much of what was already happening in Kent County in terms of convening early childhood partners across the system and engaging in that continued momentum building for political will, for collaboration and alignment. And that was a work group that I was able to lead and help facilitate. So now I want to get into some of the accomplishments, but I wanted to just give you a sense of how I've been tracking these. The NCIT understands that this kind of work can't be captured just in quantitative data points. So although there are some numbers and percentages and that impact is very important to track, I also expanded the way that I was explaining this to share about new investments and new systems building partnerships that sometimes don't translate into exact numbers right away, but they're very much part of that foundation to get to greater impact. I want to give a shout out to Child Trends too. They've been super helpful in getting us the data that we need and helping us to have a framework to work from. So the first goal area was with data. And as I mentioned, we were trying to create more interoperable data systems, more infrastructure for shared data. And so one of the first accomplishments was that 8 community partners came together to develop this pilot for what's known as the Community Data Trust. And this is a locally developed concept where we are really working to create a data sharing culture and help to give technical support and platform capacity so that partners, even if they have very different data collection systems and databases, that they can put that data together in a way that can have some common meaning and show the progress for the entire system. So I was able to put together an early childhood data strategy team and work with them to create a pilot. We were going to work specifically with home visiting providers. We have multiple programs in our community that do similar work, but it's a little bit different, and their data collection was also quite different. So we went quite far in developing this pilot, and we also had an investment with a local university, Calvin University, and their Center for Social Research to help us operationalize this concept and give us support with the platform tools that we would need. So as we were doing this, and the hope was that we would do it with the home visiting providers, and then it would expand in terms of what we could learn to inform more data sharing across other partnerships. But we had an amazing accomplishment in our community in the midst of all this, where 24 millage-funded partners representing 2,000 new children served came into the mix on our landscape. As many of you know, Kent County was very successful in passing an early childhood millage in 2018, which was a huge accomplishment and such an amazing time to get dedicated funding into our community. And as we were working on this data trust pilot, home visiting actually became one of the buckets that was funded through the millage. And with the millage, we have a very organic way of creating more data capacity, because now these millage funded partners, they're coming into a framework where they're having to use common data practices, common terms, common ways of interacting with each other. And there's new partnerships with our health department and our universities and these different aspects that can do protected data, but in a very comprehensive way. So much of the integration and interoperability that we were hoping to start on a small scale with this pilot was naturally being built on a larger scale through the millage. So we did pause with the pilot, and I think now the attention for our community in the data sharing space is really what we are learning through the millage. And I have to give a shout out to the First Steps team and the millage staff specifically, because they have been doing an amazing job paving the way. This is new, but we're learning a lot for Kent County, and I think this learning will have applicability across the rest of the early childhood work in the country as well. Last thing I wanted to mention was that there's a new relationship with an organization called Social Finance, and they specialize in helping communities to recognize where they might be able to use performance-based funding so that they can really incentivize and reward organizations that go above and beyond to reach those that are most often left out and increase equitable outcomes when we're looking at the services and programs that we provide. The second area, the healthy births, as I mentioned, we were working to implement a community-based doula program. And in terms of accomplishments, there's 16 collaborative partners that have been highly involved in this work over the past 2 years. And just at the beginning of this year, we had a total of $190,000 funded to start and launch this pilot in our community. So we are super excited. That was from the Steelcase Foundation and the Michigan Health Endowment Fund. And I put that plus sign because it's 190,000 and counting. We're also in some very promising conversations, and I'm fully confident that this is going to be completely funded to have a strong start for this program to launch. We have new partnerships through different contracts. This has been a great exercise of creating collaborations that are formalized. So between MOUs and contracts, we're working with our United Way and a national consultancy with Health Connect One, and we're working with Mercy Health St. Mary's, and so many people that are coming together to make this possible. Baxter Community Center will be the incubation site where this program will first start. And all of these partnerships, even though there have not been babies born specifically connected to this, this is creating such a strong framework and foundation for this to continue to grow. Another really exciting development is that we were able to create a new position in our community. Just recently, we finished the interviewing process and we hired Kiera Baskin, who is a local woman of color. She has a background as a doula, a community health worker, just an advocate for birth justice. And she is going to be starting on Monday in her role as a full-time program manager for this new pilot. We have a big goal of this to be increasing the diversification in terms of the doula work in our community. This is often a service that can be inaccessible because of the income. It's not covered currently by insurance in most instances. And so many of the doulas in our community are white. They're doing amazing work, but we want to make sure that there's more cultural responsiveness in the care and just more diversification of the women who are walking into this field. Men too, if you want to be a doula, doulo, you know, we're open. I think that that could be something that is important. And we know that it does make a difference to have care from someone who looks like you and shares your cultural background. This is projected to reach 275 families a year once the doulas are trained and activated in our community. And when we look at the gap where we see low birth weight being more than 2 times as likely for women of color compared to their white peers, this program could fundamentally close that gap. And so we're very excited to see it launch. And the learnings in the evaluation model is set up in such a way that it will provide systemic information as well, not just the program outcomes for this, but how can we leverage this pilot to help us understand how we can more diversify healthcare in general and create more culturally responsive care, as we know that that is a major factor that increases some of the inequities we see in our systems. That's only been further highlighted by COVID-19. The fourth area of childcare. In this area, as I said, we were focusing initially on increasing participation with our Great Start to Quality rating system for our childcare licensed businesses in the community. And we did see a 7% increase within the 2 years. Obviously, that was before everything was disrupted with COVID, but things were really going well. There was a lot of work on more strategic communication and alignment with that. So the communication manager at First Steps Kent, Megan Strang, was a big part of that, as well as the Great Start to Quality team working together. And that was that was just a lot of progress happening there. Then after the pandemic hit, we were able to organize quite quickly as a response team. We initially started because there was just so many emails going around and a lot of confusion about what was happening and what these different executive orders meant and how we were going to respond. And so I just asked, let's get on a Zoom call. So many of the partners came onto a call very early in this pandemic in March. And it was such a helpful call to get on the same page and start to have some alignment in terms of action and response that we decided to make that a weekly call. And now since March, this team has been convening virtually every Monday to talk about what's happening, share information, and work together to support our always essential childcare businesses in our community. We were able to partner with the United Way and get $46,000 quite quickly of coronavirus relief funds that we were immediately able to turn around to get a distribution going where childcare providers were able to get items that were not able to be found in stores, such as bulk food, paper products. We were able to do so much in terms of that. And then we also had 179 providers who were representing over 3,000 children who were able to be served through that distribution. And then, okay, hold on. I just want to make sure that we're good on this. Are people seeing the screen? Okay. Cool. All right, so we now have $1.2 million that have been allocated in local CARES funding for Kent County. And this was really a big part of the crisis team and their ability to organize, to be on the ground, communicating with childcare providers, and also to then be able to translate that into very specific recommendations for our local decision makers. This team worked fast, they worked in a coordinated way, and they could define, this is the need, this is what providers are experiencing, this is what we are requiring in terms of response and recovery, and we're working directly with our county officials to make sure that these dollars then are able to be responsive. And lastly, new relationships with state legislators. Obviously, advocacy has been a big part of this work from the beginning, but now more than ever, we need to have policy change and we need to have very specific direct funding. So there has been conversations just to educate our legislators and help them to understand what the circumstance is and how it could be helpful. So in terms of this relationship, we had 4 Michigan legislators that joined our crisis call a few weeks ago. We were able to share our recommendations document and keep this conversation going so that they can be well informed as they're making policy decisions and allocating funding in response to COVID-19. Then in this 4th final area, political will and engagement, this was honestly the last day that I was kind of out and about in community. This was right, I wanna say maybe 2 days later, the schools closed and the stay-at-home orders were really fully in effect. So with all the hand sanitizer and mask stuff, I went to participate in the Michigan Association for the Education of Young Children and their policy advocacy event in Lansing. And so we had these little bears that talked about our purposes there, and we were delivering them to our legislators, and we were having advocacy conversations. And I was able to be with a group of constituents to talk to Senator Winnie Brinks, which ended up being a great start of a relationship because she's really been a champion for this work. So in terms of political will and engagement, obviously the millage was a huge accomplishment for our community. I came into the fellowship just as the education campaign was really kicking off. I started in August and the vote was in November. So when that vote was successful, we knew that we were going to have $34 million of dedicated funding coming into early childhood in Kent County, which is a pretty great way to walk in as a fellow who's leading early childhood work and have this wind behind me to keep me moving. So far, there's been 2 funding cycles and $10 million have been put into the hands of these service providers and these programs that are doing amazing work, and now they have more resource to do that. They've also been able to have a lot of support, especially from First Steps Kent, who is working to navigate all the things with the millage and supports it in a fiduciary role, to have responsiveness and flexibility as people are trying to decide how to best do this work with all the restrictions that we now face due to COVID-19. And it's been amazing to see the community step up and be very responsive and creative and collaborative as they're continuing to move forward. We have 15 new partners that joined the prenatal to third grade work group since the start of the fellowship, which brings the full count to just over 40. And this is a group that meets quarterly with three main purposes: to be a sounding board for all things early childhood at a systems level, to be a resource hub to one another, and to be a barrier buster. Sometimes there's good work happening and there's lots of momentum, but there's just one wall that needs to get knocked down. And this is a collaborative group that works together to do that I've had the privilege to facilitate throughout this fellowship. When I talk about that group of over 40 partners, that's representing over 6,000 children 0 to 3 that are served in one way or another by these partner programs. So each quarterly meeting, when you think about the reach of the tools and the resources and the information that comes from that, it is very much compounded. I also had the privilege of sitting on the steering committee for the implementation and the planning grant with Pritzker. So Michigan was awarded a planning grant to then create an early childhood policy agenda focused on infants and toddlers, and then submit for an implementation grant. And Michigan was awarded a multi-year implementation grant to now move that policy agenda forward and really align a wide collaboration across the state. So I think that that's a huge investment to be celebrating as well. There's over 950 members in the statewide coalition and building. And then the last thing I wanted to mention here is that there's been nearly 5,000 people reached so far through a new campaign. I was able to facilitate an early childhood communications team, and we were mostly talking about general messaging and how to build on the momentum of the millage messaging to just keep this on the forefront of people's minds and make sure that early childhood and the importance of it is prominent as the and resources that they can implement in their home environments to continue to support the development of their children. The last two things I wanted to mention in terms of accomplishments fall a bit outside of the scope of the action plan goals with the fellowship, but they are still things that I was able to be a part of and work toward in the fellowship. One of them is around the literacy landscape. So we know that early literacy is so important, and that has to start. It's not about starting in preschool or kindergarten. The foundations for that start far beyond that. And in our community, through my conversations, I was just recognizing that there were so many different programs that were existing with great missions and really there to support families, but many of them didn't quite know about each other, or some of them were doing similar work that wasn't very aligned. And so last August, I facilitated a convening along with my colleagues to bring together nearly 20 unique literacy organizations across our county. This was co-sponsored by Western Michigan University, First Steps Kent, and K-Connect, and we came together to have these partners learn about each other's work, who they were serving, where they were serving, what their missions were, and then facilitate a conversation to say, how can this work be better aligned? A leadership team came out of that work and then started meeting monthly to dig in even farther. They've now aligned that work to the Michigan's Literacy Essentials, which is promoted from the state level, and trying to think about how do we get what's happening in the school environments to be translated to what's also happening in the home environments and our community-based organizations. So that group convened again virtually just recently, and they're getting ready to pilot a crosswalk tool that is going to make that alignment that much more accessible. The timing to focus on how you bring some of these research-based academic strategies into also home and community-based organizations is ideal now because so much of the schooling and educational pieces are happening in the home environment with our response to COVID-19. And then the last thing I'm so excited about and so proud of is a new ebook. And I was really hoping it was going to be available by today. The last response that I got was it was uploaded to Amazon. So if not today, tomorrow, early next week, it's super close to being available for purchase. But this is something that I was able to partner with the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance to do. They had a Talking to Kids About Race workshop and a curriculum Really, it was a workbook that they had been using, but they just wanted to have it updated. It was originally done in 2012, and so there's new research, new practices, new information, and such an awakening right now happening around racial injustice and just thinking about how do we put this into the early childhood landscape and start these conversations and start building these foundations for racial equity early. So I was able to work with them to adjust their training module and do some updates. We presented that for the Michigan chapter of the Association for the Education of Young Children last November in a workshop model. And then since then, I've been working with partners and local contributors to update the workbook. And originally we were just going to do kind of a minor update, but the more I dug into it, the more I saw potential that it could be so much more. And so now it is, I can't remember off the top of my head, it's about probably a 30-page ebook or something, but it is comprehensive with research and theory connected to child development. There are some suggested scripts for just tough questions. There's scenarios and activities and a wealth of resources when it comes to books, podcasts, television shows for children, as well as resources for adults, because we know that this foundational racial equity journey has to start with ourselves. And so this book is meant to equip childcare business owners, early childhood educators, parents, caregivers, really anyone who loves children or has children in their life with the tools and resources so that they can feel confident to start these conversations and have a how-to. So this is going to be $15. It will be available on Amazon. We really hope that it spreads widely, and just keep checking back. The title is right there, Talking to Kids About Race, an introductory guide to building foundations for racial equity in early childhood. So we hope that this will take off and be really helpful for the work. Okay, so we are going to go back to a second poll. I gave you a lot of information about the accomplishments, and I will mention too that this is all documented in a written report that I'll be sharing at the end of the webinar. So don't feel bad if you didn't take a ton of notes or it was just kind of overwhelming in terms of the information. You will be able to dig into that report, and all of these things that I talked about will be discussed in even more detail. So at this time, I'm going to stop sharing so that Mark can share his screen again and do our second poll. As you think about this, you want to be looking at these different areas of work. And I'm just curious to see which areas of focus are most relevant to you at this time. So when you think about how you're positioned and how you work, what does that look like? And what's most relevant in your world right now, whether it's in your work or just in your daily life and where you're interacting. So just take a minute to go ahead and see where people are aligned. Pretty even. This is exciting to actually see the talking to kids about race. I'm glad to see that there's a lot of interest there. And also the political will and engagement. Honestly, that is a piece where focus there will have an impact on all these other areas as well. Okay, great. Thank you so much for participating in that. And I'm glad to see that many of you find alignment in some of these different areas. We're going to move on to recommendations. And I just want to make sure, I'm not monitoring the chat super great, but I want to make sure that I have the right access. I'm seeing some comments come in to just make sure that we're going to be ready for these breakout groups that we're going to do in just a little bit. So I think if I change this. Okay, so Mark, now that you're done sharing your screen, I took you off as co-host. Katie, let me know if the breakout rooms came back for you.
They did not.
They did not. What if I just make you the host?
Yep, that worked.
And then maybe can you make me the co-host so I can still share my screen?
Yep.
Perfect, thank you. We're just zooming it, you guys, we're making it. Okay, so now we are going to go to some recommendations. And I'll say that these recommendations are quite specific to Kent County, wanting to focus on how we will continue the momentum that has been built with the Pritzker Fellowship. But I do hope that there'll be some additional pieces that feel relevant for those of you that are joining from other areas. And I have some more global recommendations that I'll be sharing at the end as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, so we're done with that. So in the first area of the data systems, my recommendations when it comes to continuing the momentum is number one, completing K-Connect's data dashboard, especially in the early childhood section. So in Kent County, we have a publicly accessible data dashboard with a lot of disaggregation capabilities by income, race, ethnicity, English language learner, and geography all the way down to the school building level. I think for systems work, this is very helpful because you can get a sense of where you're starting and then really benchmark along the way. So if you start a new initiative or you start a new collaboration, what's the impact and how do some of these data measures change? Things that are focused on in the early childhood section of this dashboard are kindergarten readiness and third grade reading as the higher level success measures. But then there's different indicators such as healthy births, which is very aligned with that doula work, early literacy, preschool opportunities, school attendance, family engagement, and children being developmentally on track. We know that there's so many different indicators and things to track when it comes to early childhood work, but these are some that we can just look at to say if these things are going well, if we're seeing disparity gaps close, and if we're seeing these things increase in a positive way, we know that we are on the right track when we're thinking about our work together, thinking about early childhood systems. So we have 3 indicators left to populate on that dashboard, and there's been a lot of community collaboration. The ones that are left are the ones that just aren't easy. And so what we've been trying to do as a community is not stop there. So often when you're working with data, you get to a point where it's just like, oh, well, we don't collect that, or that's actually not able to be disaggregated. And then sometimes we just kind of stop. And we're just saying we need to not give up. If we don't collect it, or if we don't have the capacity, what does it look like to build it? What needs to happen? How do we need to work together? Because we're going to be able to make much more informed decisions when we can look across data for the whole landscape and then see where we need to have targeted strategies to make sure that equitable outcomes are attainable. So that's certainly a recommendation that I would have. I would also recommend the sharing and applying of a data filtering tool that was developed by K-Connect that helps organizations start to get on the same page when it comes to their data. Often we are able to quite easily think about the information in terms of what we're doing every day and who we're serving, but it can be harder to measure the actual impact, especially when you think about things like child development or early literacy. So we know maybe how many books we gave out, but what is that doing for an adult's confidence in doing literacy activities or a child's ability to advance in their literacy skills? So this data filtering tool can be really helpful as people are thinking about what kinds of data to be monitoring and things like that. And that is a tool that's shared in the report. Applying the learnings from the millage. As I shared, we are on the brink of some really new and exciting discoveries as we think about what this millage is opening up in terms of data sharing and integration. And so it's my recommendation that that would be tracked, and I know the team, so they're already very much in line with this recommendation, but that will not only be tracked, but shared within Kent County and widely, because we are in a unique position with this early childhood millage. The year that it passed, it was the only one in the country of its kind to pass. And so we have this advanced look in terms of what's possible. And I think tracking that and sharing that is going to be very valuable to the field. Rewarding transparency and continuous quality improvement. For sure, it's a recommendation as we get into more and more data access that we don't weaponize it, that when we see gaps or we see missteps or we see problems, that's our call to action to come together and support each other to do better and not shame organizations, or that's not the time where you really start to defund immediately. But what does that mean that we can all be looking at to make sure that we're moving in a collaborative way in the best interests of children and families? Lastly, applying a collective impact approach in response to data. I do think that the community data trust concept, that's very much what it's grounded in and what it gets at. The reference for that is also in the report. And I think there's some interesting things that communities, especially those doing early childhood systems work, could look at. And it's something I hope that takes more and more space in Kent County as well. For healthy births, I'm speaking more specifically to this new pilot that's going to be launching. So tracking and sharing data is going to be very important. And just as I said, not just about the program outcomes, which we're super excited about. We talk about that we're just going to have brown chunky babies because the data point there is around birth weight. And we are just so excited for more babies to be born at a healthy birth weight, more positive outcomes for mothers. We want to see decreases in infant mortality and maternal mortality, especially in communities of color where it's quite problematic. And so the data tracking is going to be important in those aspects. But if we want this pilot to truly inform the broader conversation around culturally responsive care and around the ability to diversify our healthcare system, there has to be very specific data tracking in this pilot that can have that broader meaning. So that's something that I want to recommend for sure. Structuring the evaluation to focus on that will be a big piece of it, and extending these learnings, as I just mentioned. Then the policy and advocacy piece too. As I said from the beginning, this is often an inaccessible service. And I'm very grateful that throughout the pilot, it's been organized and funded in such a way that the women trained to be doulas will be compensated, not only for their actual doula work, but even through the training. We're going to be offering them stipends to take the time out and get this certification and get this training. And then throughout the pilot, the women who are able to receive doula services will be able to do that at no cost to them. But we know that that's not sustainable, and that's not something that we're going to be able to do in the long term with philanthropy. This is where thinking about policy, and especially insurance coverage, is going to be a big deal. We'd love to see this become a Medicaid covered service, and even for private insurers as well. So the data tracking comes into play here, because if we can show the positive outcomes that really do save insurance companies money, there's a case to be made that this should be a way to move forward, and it does open the door for more responsive care that can have a lot more cultural intelligence built into how it's offered. And then another one for Kent County that I would highly recommend is establishing a local peer network for doulas of color. This cohort that will be starting with the training through this new pilot, we hope will not be the last cohort. But as we all know, it's really powerful to be able to work with your colleagues that are doing the same type of work in the same type of field and rely on each other as you're continuing to grow and cultivate your profession. So to see a peer group for doulas of color, as many of them we're hoping are just going to start to get piped into the system, I think would be a very wise idea. For childcare, my recommendation is to maintain this Kent Child Care Crisis Response Team in some form. I'm hoping that it won't be at the point of crisis response in the long term, but even the collaboration amongst partners and how that has been so effective in being able to move quickly in response to the needs of our childcare businesses has been powerful to watch, and I hope that we can keep that momentum going. I also think it should be connected to the ongoing work with shared services. And Kristen Sabaluski is on the call today. She is the program manager for shared services in Kent County, and she's been a part of that team, the crisis team. She'll actually take on the facilitation as I'm transitioning out of the role. And so I'm very excited to see how this collaboration with the shared services effort will be ongoing. I do feel that my role in terms of facilitation and project management has been instrumental in much of the progress, and I've been very invested in by the Pritzker Children's Initiative and the fellowship with facilitation training and skills that equipped me to come alongside these partners, lean on their expertise in the work, but help them move it into coordinated action. So I would recommend that Kent County just continue to invest in that. Sometimes it feels I think it's maybe a little bit harder to think about the funding that's required to have somebody that maybe you just feel like their role is just to have meetings. But if that can be done in a skilled way, we've seen here in Kent County the movement that can happen. Harnessing the momentum for advocacy at the state level, we have a spotlight on early childhood right now. There was already momentum building, but now with the COVID-19 pandemic, we are seeing the essentialism of so many things in early childhood as they're now having to be absorbed in other places in our communities. And so as people are waking up to that, this is really the time to be solid on the messaging, to be aligned in our requests, and to harness that momentum so that we can not just have things that are responsive to this moment with the pandemic, but long-term and sustainable policy change. Lastly, engaging to power in the power to the profession. This was already started in thinking about early childhood workforce, increasing wages, diversifying the pipeline, all these different pieces to solidify the industry even more. And I think that this is a time to dig into that because we need our early childhood professionals to thrive and be sustained throughout this pandemic and to come out stronger on the other side so that they can continue to do the quality work and be compensated and rewarded accordingly to what it is that the value they really bring. For recommendations in the political will and engagement area, I definitely have seen so much now that's coming up even more and more about anti-racism. And I think we've done a good job in starting to initially think about diversity, moving into equity, and now I really do think it's the time for anti-racism and thinking about how do we apply those frameworks in early childhood, where it's just not enough to not act in ways that are racist, but you really have to be intentionally acting in non-racist ways to stop perpetuating the same disparate outcomes. And I think there's lots of tools out there and resources, and it's time for early childhood to jump on that very explicitly. And there's some tools that I share in the report that can, I think, give a beginning framework to some of that. Fostering strategic connection between community groups. One of the things that's been a great asset for me in my work as a fellow is that Kent County has numerous systems level convening groups with K-Connect and First Steps, our Great Start Collaborative, our Kent ISD, groups with the health department, and then so many others. And I think we will be so much more powerful the deeper that we can make those connections and those coordinations so that we're doing work together and not in silos. We talk about that a lot, but we started to get at more of some infrastructure pieces of what that could look like. And I would encourage Kent County and especially the leaders of those organizations to just keep digging into that so that those connections can be further operationalized. This is very specific, and I know there's some MLQP folks on the call today. Didn't tell you I was recommending this, but I hope that you'll be excited. So I was able to participate in an advocacy boot camp with the Michigan League for Public Policy that was phenomenal. There's also been a lot of policy pieces that I've been exposed to through the fellowship, but it was really great to have this local resource that was very familiar with our local legislature and our particular budget cycle and all these different things that are specific to Michigan. I went into it with a frame of mind of really wanting to focus on childcare, and I came out with so many tools and resources. So I would love to see this model expanded when we think about early childhood and other ways so that the folks in these professions who aren't necessarily super expert when it comes to policy or maybe familiar with that world can be equipped and then apply that, because we know that the advocacy pieces are essential, and the more people that we can have well versed in it and feel confident in conversations with legislators or things of that nature, I think the better. Also, the Manifesto for Race Equity and Parent Leadership in Early Childhood, that's starting to get more and more attention, and I know it's been shared a lot. My recommendation would be just continuing to partner with the Great Start Collaborative and our local parent networks to be able to really get that more operationalized as well. Now moving to how is that structured into our policies, our practices, and our behaviors in the work so that these things that are listed in there are the reality of what's experienced. And then lastly, advocating for policy priorities being promoted through the statewide early childhood agenda. If you're not familiar with that, that'd be great to go on the Early Childhood Investment Corporation's website. That's something we can share as well so that you know what these policy priority areas are, because we need a loud, strong voice from all across the state to help this implementation be successful. And we're primed for it with the investment from Pritzker that's going to help us align as a state. One last thing that's not on the slides, but I wanted to mention as I was just thinking about it this morning, is just a recommendation for our funding partners to keep leaning in and thinking about how to best fund systems level work, especially as I was talking about even some of these reach numbers and some of these outcomes where much of it is around this relationship building and the infrastructure and just bringing people together. And that doesn't always translate right away into specific numerical metrics. And so often our funding structures are connected to those numbers. And I would just encourage you to keep thinking creatively and broadly about how to fund systems work in a way that will enable all the infrastructure pieces to be built along with numbers being reached, and knowing that that infrastructure support will only result in more numbers in the future, and also help the whatever is gained to be sustained, because the infrastructure is what is going to help programs, services, policies reach the most that they can. So now, lastly, before we move into the breakouts, I just wanted to take a minute to talk more about a global recommendation when we think about our community of practitioners and parents and families and stakeholders all across the country who care about early childhood. I was able to be exposed to this concept of systemsness more recently from Civic Lab. And you see a little quote about that here on the screen. And what this really reminded me of was the concept of it takes a village. And we hear that a lot, and there's some not a lot of clarity around where this saying originated, but there is an African proverb, which when you translate it, it says, regardless of a child's biological parents, its upbringing belongs to the community. So this is stated to be possibly one of the roots of that it takes a village saying. And I just think that systems and communities have a collective responsibility to be the village that enables all children to thrive. So this idea of systemsness, to me, brings that village mentality into the 21st century. And we can think about how we're illuminating what is often invisible and then responding to it. And in this process of coming together, hard truths have to be faced of what's working, what's not working. And individuals, organizations, and systems are invited to change together once they can really look at this and evaluate it. Thinking about a common goal and creating conditions that can improve the lives and opportunities for all the children and families and sustain the momentum moving forward. So there's some particular tools in the report with the systemsness framework, and I would just encourage all of you to dig into that and think about how it could apply to your work. The prenatal to third grade work group met virtually after the pandemic for our regular quarterly meeting, and they came up with 4 priority areas that they wanted to encourage all early childhood system partners to prioritize as we're moving through this pandemic. They're quite simple, they're not new, but they're really powerful. Number 1, listen to families. As we're thinking about what do we do, how does school work, what about childcare, what are the needs, those are your experts. That's where the richest information is going to come from. Families should be guiding this work. Embedding racial equity into the work is also going to be so important. As I stated, anti-racist frameworks need to become the norm of how we operate. Elevating social emotional wellness, and that's not just for our children, but for our adults. We are experiencing stress and uncertainty and disruption at unprecedented levels. And what we need to do to come around the mental and emotional wellness for our kids and families is top priority, even as we're thinking about physical health as well. And the prioritizing of 2-generational strategies. Everything that we're doing for kids, we need to be doing with the adults in mind for it to be the most meaningful. So this was a great list, and there's some tools in the report that align with these things. And the last one that I wanted to just add to the list was this need for a shift in power. And when I think about this, I'm really talking about prioritizing that shift to, as I said, the families being the leaders. Too often, the decisions that impact our young children and families are made based on political agendas or traditional funding models and scarcity mentalities. And as a result, the change can be slow, and the consequences or the impact cannot be what it was intended. So I think there's very specific ways that you can start to disrupt these trends. It's always going to depend on the context of where you're located and what you're trying to do, but prioritizing equity and anti-racism and just grounding these shifts in a way that will honor lived experience to shape systems based on the expertise of the system users is a great place to start. And again, there's some tools in the report that can give some further ideas. So with all that being said, we are going to move into some discussion time. I have talked for quite a while, and now it's time for you all to talk to each other. So we are going to move into some breakout discussions, and I want you to select somebody to take some notes. There's not specifically table captains or group leaders that will be on these groups. I did ask my colleague Katie to do the groups based on people who are in Kent County and people who are outside of Kent County, so the conversations can be a bit more direct to work that's happening here or work that's happening more nationally. And what I'd like you to discuss, first of all, is where you see your work aligning with these recommendations. Katie is going to be putting in the chat right now a Google Doc. And if this feels overwhelming and too much, you do not have to do this part. But if you can, while you're in the breakouts, opening up that Google Doc, the recommendations are listed in there, and there's a place where you could just put your name and email, especially for those who are in Kent County, but not limited to Kent County, because as I'm saying that I want this work to be sustained, and there's already so many people that are in place that are doing this work, will keep doing this work even after my role is transitioned. We'd also love to just keep building those collaborations. So if you're on this call and there was something I talked about that really resonates with you, putting your contact information, and we'd love to get you connected to the ongoing work. So that Google Doc will be put in the chat, and so you can access that. And then as far as the discussion, the question I'd really love for you to focus on is, what should our community prioritize? I gave quite a bit of recommendations. I think that the fellowship asked communities to select 1 or 2 goals. As you can see, we selected 4 because we are Kent County. And there was other things that I even did on top of those 4. So with all of that work and all of it being important, I'd just love for you all to have a conversation about what should be prioritized given the context of this moment we're living in, and how could that help to build on the momentum that was established within the Pritzker Fellowship. So that's really the question for discussion. Select someone to take some notes. That will be the main discussion. And if you're able, also go ahead and access that Google Doc to put your name by anything that you feel like resonates with you or is work that you'd like to join. We're going to take 20 minutes for this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. We'll also broadcast these questions during the discussion time so that you can have some reminders along the way. And let me see, let me quick check the chat, make sure we're all good. I do see, I think, Katie, were you able to put that Google Doc in the chat?
Yep, it's right there.
Okay, so you can access that. And now, Katie, I think we are ready. So you can go ahead and send people to breakout rooms, and we will bring you back in 20 minutes. Okay, so hopefully you all had a good discussion. Thanks for doing the Google Doc for those of you who are able to access that. And you can also just add in the chat if there's, oh, that's the timer, time's up. You can also add in the chat if there's a piece of work that you want to be connected to, but you weren't able to access the Google Doc. But right now, I just want to take a few minutes to hear from some of the groups. If you would like to share, maybe you were the scribe for your group, especially in terms of the question around what we should prioritize to sustain momentum from the fellowship. If you can just go ahead and type share in the chat, I'm going to monitor that so I can call on people and we can avoid some of the Zoom talkover. But I just love to hear some of the discussion that occurred in the group. So go ahead and just type share and I'll call on you. Okay, how about Andrew?
All right, good morning, everyone. So I was with Barb Hawkins-Palmer and Amy Turner-Tolley, and at first we actually spent a great deal of time talking about how much admiration and respect we have for Anissa, so that did gobble up a little bit of the first part. But in terms of prioritization, we really focused on the last bucket that was down there around political will and engagement. And we felt like this had a particularly strong local context to it. Kent County has historically, and this is a generalization, but bear with me, Kent County has historically sort of been a let's do it ourselves kind of community and not necessarily engaged quite as actively, certainly with sort of state and federal type advocacy. So really to sort of get out from sort of just being insular and really thinking about the systemic transformational aspects of this and how that requires changing the landscape and changing the rules. And then we also talked a little bit about that notion of sustainability. We have a very philanthropic community, which is great, that likes to start things. I'm part of that field. That happens. We like to start things, but then we ask that silly question around sustainability when the facts are some things just have to be subsidized, right? And have to be done so for a long time for that value to really come. But we did talk about some of those social impact models. Anissa, you had mentioned social finance has taken a look at this work through the Pritzker Fellows, and that notion of investing in prevention, which is really a way to be thinking about communities in a respectful way, in a justice-oriented way, rather than acute treatment after the fact, which is really much more charitable at best. So that was our conversation.
Thank you, Andrew. And I can see a lot of your funder colleagues on the call as well. So I think that I know you're starting to have those conversations together. And I think that there's so many things that we're being invited to right now to either think about differently or even some things that we're being invited to leave behind. And so there's definitely a lot of opportunity in that conversation. Jaren.
So we kind of had two buckets that we spoke about. The first being the MLPP bootcamp model, but what would this look like if it was a little bit more targeted towards Kent County, bringing the advocacy to some of the childcare providers to be able to voice their frustrations or some of the barriers that they face. And whether that's like an association of childcare providers at a statewide level, or whether that's like advocacy through the actual providers themselves. As we know, things get done a little bit more when we have larger voices coming together. And so Jamie had talked about maybe what is MLPP's role in Kent County and how does it maybe shift a little bit if this is a priority. And then the other thing we talked about is what does it look like as a small business? And I know conversations had, I believe, recently started, and I know Shanae and Anissa and everybody else in the childcare world is talking about how do we build up childcare as a small business, and talking about what is it, and I'm sure shared services will look at this too, like legal assistance, accounting, bulk pricing, and I'm talking because Anissa's husband is the perfect person to be really elevating this conversation. So we're glad we had him in our conversation to talk about how does small businesses come around people like childcare providers to be able to better build up them as like these businesses that they are. So those were the two like really pillars of our conversation.
Thank you, Jaren. And I know I've been in conversation with Michigan League for Public Policy staff, and we've been talking about how to create more of those localized policy agendas that then align with the state and then can just start to connect even more. So I think there's some of that in the works, and it'll be important to keep it going. And in terms of the business piece, that also is something that we've been thinking about a lot. And First Steps Kent is in conversation right now, even with the Pritzker Children's Initiative and others around some of these next steps. And one of the partnerships we're really excited about is connecting with Spring GR, who has a business kind of coaching model that helps people with business ideas become entrepreneurs and start things, or people who have businesses really learn how to refine and perfect their business practices. And we'd like to use that model and partner with them, very specifically coming alongside of childcare. And I should also mention MELBA, the Michigan Early Learning Business Alliance, that is a state level shared services that's trying to put together these large collaborations and purchasing pools and things like that for childcare providers to make sure that these businesses stay in business and can have a lot of those supports. Talent 2025 is a good part too. That's something I didn't mention in my recommendations, but our private sector and our business community certainly has a part, even when we think about the creative funding or the collaboration and what we're seeing right now with childcare providers, knowing that they have to be partnering and supporting childcare if they're going to continue to have a available workforce. So, Shanae.
Yeah, thank you for a powerful conversation and even what I've already heard. We were in a group with Anne Marie, Wendy Randall, and Paula Brown, and we had a good robust conversation around first just alignment opportunities. I'll just lift up a couple of them that I thought was really insightful and maybe a really big opportunity. Let me first say this, though, that we voted that both racial equity and two-gen approaches would be the priorities that we like to bring forth from our group. We thought that, we were all on board with parent voice. We thought that through two-gen approaches, that could be weaved in and lifted up, but that the two-gen approach piece could be a good container for kind of that both and. Just a couple of things that were really interesting. One was that, particularly in two-gen approaches, how you have workforce development who have navigators, and you now have, well, you've had it's sparsed in the different agencies navigators, and then you've got now this new navigation infrastructure, and what would it look like for both of them to kind of dovetail at some level. It really could be some big leverage that comes out of that. Obviously, the piece around racial equity and the manifesto we thought could be really powerful. And then I just want to give a shout out particularly to Andrew, because the pieces around sustainability and the pieces around social impact and prevention are become critical ways that we need to think about sustaining systems. So
thanks, Janae. And I'm really just so grateful for you being in the new role with Campfire West Michigan 4C, but bringing all the other hats that you've worn previously to inform your leadership in that role. That's already being felt, and that's a really powerful partnership. So Julie, I think I accidentally skipped over you. Julie, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Anissa. We actually were saying that you're demonstrating right now one of those talents that we think is so important in the community, and that is the art of facilitation and the science of facilitation, and see a need for more people with those talents within the work that we're doing. So kudos to you for that. Our two topics really were somewhat similar to those that have been mentioned. We talked about the intersectionality of First Steps Kent with so many organizations, particularly K-Connect and the service providers, and the importance of getting this work done, especially the data sharing and the racial equity pieces. And then also with the shared services, again, wanting to see that grow significantly within the area. We also talked about being stuck a little bit on the where. There are still some turf issues within the community, and the consideration was that both K-Connect and First Step Kent, as conveners, not service providers, can be really those neutral bodies that can help us move through some of these issues and be more effective in our work. We also talked about the importance of parent leadership, particularly at this point in time, and parents stepping into roles as leaders of their children and experts on their children and helping to elevate their voices. So how do we continue to do that? And the fact also that parents need our support more than ever. So that's basically a summary of what we talked about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julie. And I think that's definitely been a helpful perspective that I've been able to bring to the role, being a parent myself and having, my youngest just sort of left the 0 to 3. He's 4 now, but he was still, he was not quite 3 when I started. But I think that even in the midst of everything that's happening right now, living it has really helped me then think about how to lead system responses. So, and I appreciate how that is really prioritized and honored in Kent County, and I hope that we keep doing more of that. Okay, I have Neil.
There, the button doesn't respond the first time. Hi, everybody. I had the privilege of being in a room with Michelle Van Dyke and Shelby French from United Way and First Steps Kent, respectively. And I think briefly, a lot of commendation for the reliance on data from all three of us, and pointing to that as a key to sustainability, in particular to earning a renewal of the millage. And on racial equity issues, 2 areas of consensus, I think. One is that it is a model much to be commended to see the communication this last week about the Doulas of Color program, and thinking that we need to continue to hold it up without undue pressure on Kiara and the rest of the team, right? But just that story is so essential to describing to people what it means to be anti-racist in a practical sense, right? To work against the tide of inequity in the healthcare system and otherwise. So that's one point. The other one is a drumbeat that you've all heard from me before. I don't think we can produce the scale of voice for lived experience that all of our different projects and initiatives need unless we create some sort of central infrastructure for hospitality, childcare, recruitment, professional development, all that sort of stuff, so that every project that needs lived experience and voice from the community can get it.
Thank you, Neil. And I know that K-Connect is in conversations right now with the Johnson Center and thinking about some of that in terms of a bigger infrastructure to not only create some of those connections, but also help to find ways to start to just solidify that community intelligence so that we can start to have just a wealth of resources, information about the lived experience and the expertise without constantly having to go back to re-up with another focus group, another survey. Of course, the context changes and we have to update that, but there's also certain stories that are true time and time again. And the more that we can learn those and have those embedded in the way that we work and make decisions, we're just trying to think more about how to elevate that to be a system resource. Okay, is there anybody else that wanted to share? I know Leslie had to jump off the call. She had put in the chat, she had said maybe Lauren, but I don't want her to necessarily volunteer you to share for your group. But if there's anyone else, you can jump in here and share. If you put your name here in the chat, I'll call on you. Otherwise, we will keep going.
Hi, Anissa.
Oh, hi, Kristen.
Hi, this is Kristen, and it was interesting. Leslie had a call, but I had a call right before that. So I just wanted to share that we really talked about the Michigan statewide policy work, and really continuing to elevate that. And but of course, we discussed childcare and shared services also, and the data piece. So, and I was in a group with Lauren, Leslie, and then Lynn was with us too, but she was having some technology difficulties. And so, but really just that statewide policy, especially with families. And we also talked about the tri-share model and a couple of other pieces.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. There's not any lack of things to get involved with, things to connect to, and things to continue pushing forward together. So thanks for joining in with the conversation. And I just know that this momentum is going to continue. It's on such a great track. I'm going to share my screen again now to bring us to some of our last pieces. All right, so back up for everybody. Okay, so we just did the report out. Can you all see the screen? Thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I want to just circle back to our story time that we started with at the beginning when we were talking about my friends, Margarita and Jeff, who were expecting twins. So throughout their pregnancies, first of all, isn't this just a gorgeous picture? But throughout the pregnancy, it was really my pleasure to be a resource to them. So I was able to share information and ideas from my own lived experience, having had 3 children, never had twins though. And I was also just able to share from the expertise I was building every day through my work as a Pritzker Fellow. And I'm so happy to say that Margarita and Jeff welcomed their twin baby girls, Ava and Maya, at the end of May. They were born early. They were born in the midst of a global pandemic, and they were born at a time of profound social unrest due to racial injustice. And, I stepped in where I could, helping to bring them food, helping around the house, feeding these babies, snuggling these babies, being kind of more careful with my family and our exposure so I could be available to help with the twins. And I'm really grateful that I had the privilege to come alongside of them as they started this amazing journey of parenthood. But it was also just so clear to me that the systems work that I've done through this fellowship matters just as much, if not more, than the way that I was able to just step in with the day-to-day responsibilities of welcoming babies. So the girls are actually almost 3 months old now, but this was when they were 2 months old. You can see Maya with the M and Ava with the A. And when I look at these girls and I have the privilege to be able to interact with them even in person, it is just so clear to me that Ava and Maya deserve to grow up with parents who can care for them with living wages and health insurance and paid family leave. They deserve a chance to participate in developmental screenings and be connected to early intervention if needed. Ava and Maya deserve access to preventative health services and necessary medical care. They deserve high quality childcare that their parents can afford. They deserve healthy food, secure housing, and a safe environment. They deserve to grow up in a world that affirms their existence and provides equitable opportunities for them to thrive. And my work through the fellowship was for Ava and Maya. It was for my 3 boys and on behalf of all children and families who deserve systems that serve and support them. The babies truly are our bosses, and we work to advance transformational systems change for all of them, for ourselves and for the interconnected future that we all share. So the end of the fellowship will definitely not be the end of my work, and I hope to continue collaborating with all of you as we work to advance this movement. My work as a Pritzker Fellow in Kent County has allowed me the opportunity to experience systems building firsthand, and I've had the honor to bring this village mentality together, connecting with individuals and organizations and getting tools and resources that enable collaborative efforts. I'm so proud of the progress that's been made, and I implore all of us to keep going. We need to fully embrace all children as collectively ours, and we have to be that village that will protect, nurture, and invest in early childhood. We're all counting on each other. And with that in mind, I want to share a brief video that was created in April. So this is kind of when we were still very much at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, and there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear. And the Week of the Young Child happened in that time. And you'll notice that Ava and Maya were already helping my work from in the womb. This is a picture of them before they were even born with Margarita and Jeff. But I was able to work with Senator Brinks. This was kind of an idea that we brought up at that policy event that I had mentioned before, to still give a tribute and honor the Week of the Young Child, even with everything going on, and try to think of a creative way to share hope together and keep the priority of early childhood at the forefront. So that's where this Hope Bubbles Up campaign came from. And we are gonna cross our fingers and hope that this plays and works. And Mark is online as a backup, just in case. Okay, I'm gonna pull it up to the beginning. Did you guys hear that? Thumbs up if you heard it. Okay, here we go.
Hi, I'm State Senator Winnie Brinks, and I'm here today with a special presentation of a tribute for the Michigan Association for the Education of Young Children. I'm here to declare that it will be Week of the Young Child, April 11 to 17. And in celebration of that, I want to personally say thank you to all the advocates and early childhood educators out there who are doing everything they can to make sure that every single child in Michigan has access to high quality early childhood experiences. The work that you are doing is so important. It's important not only for those children, it's important for the future of our state. We know that strong children build strong communities now and in the future.
Oh yeah, ooh, ooh, yeah. If you're tossing and you're turning and you just can't fall asleep, I'll sing a song beside you. And if you ever forget how much you really mean to me, can count on me like 1, 2, 3, I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you like 4, 3, 2, and you'll be there. 'Cause that's what friends are supposed to do, oh yeah. Ooh, yeah, yeah. You'll always have my shoulder when you cry. I'll never let go, never say goodbye. You know you can count on me like 1, 2, 3, I'll be there. And I know when I need.
In honor of your work, I offer you this special tribute on behalf of the state of Michigan today. Thank you for all that you do to serve the youngest citizens among us.
You can count on me 'cause I can count on you.
Oh, okay. I just love that so much. And there was so many local kids that contributed pictures and videos for that. It was really special, especially at a time where we really needed a lot of hope, still do. So at this point, I just want to move to taking a moment to express my gratitude, most especially to Kent County Children and Families, who that's what this work has been about for me. And I want to give a special shout out to my partner, Jermel, who's on the call today, and he is my absolute strongest champion. My own 3 boys, Malachi, Nehemiah, and Josiah, who are the biggest reasons that I do this work. And also to the Chappelle twins, Ava and Maya, who shared their story. Thanks to their parents for allowing me to just share the amazing gift of those girls as part of this Capstone webinar. You can see tons of organizations and individuals on the screen. I could not even fit them all, but obviously the Pritzker Children's Initiative and my other fellows, my other fine fellows, all my colleagues that I've worked with, and so many organizations are funding partners. This is this work. Yes, I have been able to step up in a leadership role and guide and support so much of it. But systems work is about all the individuals that make up the systems, and this work would not be possible without partnerships and collaboration and the tireless efforts of so many of you and others who could not be on this call. And so I thank you. I thank you for making this possible. And I thank you that it's not done, that this is going to keep going. And then I just want to say that even though I am going to be in a different role, I am not going to be leaving. You know, I'm still going to be in Kent County. So that's going to be something that is important for everybody to know. And also you can, I hope that you will stay in touch. The full report for everything that I shared along with the recommendations, Katie is actually going to put that in the chat now as a PDF so you can have immediate access. We'll also put the report on the K-Connect and First Steps websites. And I believe that we'll put the recording and we can make these slides available too. And I wanted to just share my new email. I'll still have access to the K-Connect email for a while, just with some final wrap-up things. But if you do want to record this email, it'll be a way to get in touch with me. I'm going to be doing some consulting as I start alongside as I start my PhD program at Michigan State University. So this is my website for that, as well as my email, because I'm really hoping that the relationships that have been created and deepened within this fellowship will continue. And I'm dedicated to this field, and I know I'll still be doing work with many of you for years to come. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
You
Thank
rock,
you
Anissa.
for being here. Thank you. Thank you, Maggie.